We know we have potential. I think everybody in this building knows that. The roster that Jason and them have built, the chemistry that we have, the standard that Coach Bowles sets each day, elite is the standard. And so we realize that we've had the midseason lull. We've had to scratch late in the year to get into the playoffs. The mindset is to be hungry, be killers.
When you talk about some of the most consistent franchises in the NFL in the past half decade plus, I think the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are very underrated in that conversation, and they embody the mantra of being consistent while also being a physical and dynamic type of football team. And in this NFL season preview, kicking off the NFC South, we're going to be talking about why the Tampa Bay Buccaneers will be dangerous in the 2025 NFL season. 4 consecutive NFC South division titles, and I know a lot of people always bring up the fact that that's been one of the weakest divisions in the NFL in the previous few seasons, but regardless of that situation, when you look at last year when the Atlanta Falcons swept the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Buccaneers were still able to take care of business throughout the mid to end of the season and win the division. And in all intensive cases, you can make the argument that the Buccaneers were a Baker Mayfield fumble away from beating the Commanders and making the divisional round for a second year in a row. Speaking of a Baker Mayfield, a player who has really revitalized himself in the past couple of seasons with Tampa Bay, it's been incredible to see the type of journey that he has had. First and foremost, we all know the tenure that he had, being the first pick of the Cleveland Browns like in the 2018 NFL draft. I think his best season in Cleveland was in the 2020 season where him and the Browns won a playoff game and ended up losing to the Chiefs in the divisional round. But after the 2021 season, the Browns ended up trading Baker Mayfield to the Carolina Panthers in 2022, where that was a very short stint, ended up getting released, then played 5 games with the Rams, where it seemed like that was the point where he ended up getting things back together. And in 2023, mind you, I'm not sure if a lot of people remember, Baker Mayfield actually approached a Jason Light, GM of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, through his agents to talk about a potential opportunity, and he was in a quarterback battle with Cal Trask before winning the job in the 2023 season. And since then, Baker has really taken off and proved honestly why he's a top 10 NFL quarterback right now going into this 2025 year. If you look at the past couple of seasons, we'll talk about last year in particular because it was the most recent, but in 2023, his first season with the Buccaneers, threw for over 4,000 passing yards, thrown for 28 touchdowns and 10 interceptions, as previously mentioned, leading the Buccaneers to a playoff win against the Philadelphia Eagles, dominating them 32-9, and then just losing 31-23 in the divisional round against the Lions that same 2023 season. Baker was able to cash in and sign a 3-year, $100 million deal going into 2024, which looked like a bargain at the time, but now you can make the case after last season and then another potential explosive season, which I think the Buccaneers will have, Baker Mayfield is going to be able to climb the charts in terms of being a highest paid quarterback in terms of an annual average standpoint with the way that he has continuously been playing and looks to continue on towards that trajectory of being a top 10 quarterback and being the reason why the Buccaneers can actually be serious contenders in the NFC. In 2024 last year, he threw for exactly 4,500 passing yards, leading the league in passing touchdowns with 41 touchdowns thrown, and he did throw 16 interceptions. You would certainly like him to get that turnover rate down, but also you live with it because when he's able to have ratios sometimes of a 4-to-1 touchdown interception ratio, or even in some games when he's playing clean and efficient, having 5 touchdowns, having a 153 quarterback rating in divisional games, and just overall being poised within the offense and scrambling when he needs to as well, having 378 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns too. He's really been able to remind a lot of people why he was the number 1 pick going into 2018 draft and why he was a Heisman level quarterback at Oklahoma, and we've seen a lot of remnants of that in the rapport that he has had with a Mike Evans, who was an all-time great wide receiver. Evans has had 11 consecutive 1,000-yard receiving seasons, even with last year only playing 14 games. He was able to do that in the final game of the season against the Saints, and he's just the definition of the prototype type of X receiver. I know everyone has the Calvin Johnson probably being the embodiment of that, but in terms of a consistency standpoint, maybe he isn't the most flashy wide receiver, but he gets you the big plays that you need, and he's always able to make life easier for the quarterbacks that he has played with, even with a Jameis Winston before playing with Tom Brady, and now currently with Baker Mayfield. Mike Evans has been that receiving threat that you can scheme for, try to send 2 at in double coverage, and still it won't matter, and that's a perfect thing, especially with them drafting a wide receiver in the first round in Emeka Ibuka, who that pick really caught a lot of people off guard. With a wide receiver room that already consists of Mike Evans, Chris Godwin returning from injury, who we'll talk about a little bit more throughout the video, Jalen McMillan, who played really good in his rookie season, and Sterling Shepard, college teammate of Baker Mayfield and Trey Palmer, you would think that the Buccaneers would have prioritized drafting a corner or someone on the defensive end in the first round, but I think actually drafting Emeka Ibuka, you can make the argument that's the extra dangerous element that they've needed to really unlock this offense furthermore, to keep defenses honest and be off guard and make the Bucs a threat to be one of the top offenses in the league in 2025. With Ibuka being at Ohio State, we know that he's played with a lot of wide receiver talent in the same room as him. Marvin Harrison Robinson Jr., who was a first-round pick last year, 4th overall in the 2024 draft. He's played with Jackson Smith and Jigba, who was a first-round pick in the 23 draft. Played with Jeremiah Smith, who was just a freshman last year, and who is certainly going to be one of the first picks in around the 2027 draft. He's at times been looked at the number 2 option in his receiving room throughout his career at Ohio State. But now going into Tampa Bay, I think that him being able to take the role that he's had, to be able to sit back despite knowing that he's had a lot of talent and still make plays and be a leader to help in Ohio State win a national championship in 2024, I think that he's going to be rewarded in terms of that type of aspect, being a leader, to now his ability just being able to roam around at the slot position as a wide receiver, to be arguably the best wide receiver in this rookie class in this upcoming season. I think it's not crazy at all to say that. I know players like a Tetero McMillan was the first wide receiver besides Travis Hunter, who was drafted in the draft. I mean, you know, he's a two-way player, but Travis Hunter was picked before Emeka Egbuka, Tetero McMillan, and Matthew Golden was picked a little bit after Emeka Egbuka. But I think Egbuka, he's going to have a lot of one-on-one opportunities in this offense, and the Buccaneers, they really utilize a lot of 3-by-1 sets at the receiving position, and Emeka Egbuka is going to be able to play inside at the slot position, but also they'll be able to move him around and sometimes play on the outside to be a burner, because his route running ability is something that the Bucs' new offensive coordinator, Josh Grizzard, who's been promoted to being the offensive coordinator after being the passing game coordinator, he's going to be able to put Egbuka into spots to be very prolific in that offense and make a lot of high-level plays. And if you look at even last year, he had 81 receptions for over 1,000 receiving yards, averaging 12.5 yards per reception and 10 receiving touchdowns. So even playing with a freshman like a Jeremiah Smith, who had 76 receptions for 1,300 receiving yards and 15 receiving touchdowns, averaging 17 point yards per reception, man, 2027 draft gonna be crazy. But even Emeka Egbuka taking the backseat to a player like that, I think, like I said, he's gonna be rewarded in this offense, who, as I mentioned, has a Mike Evans, who is always a focal point of opposing defensive coordinators when matching against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Then a Chris Godwin, who's for years been one of the most underrated receivers in the league. You saw how integral he was in that Super Bowl run in the 2020-21 season, and even in 2023 when he was utilized well. And I think that ankle injury was so untimely for a Chris Godwin, who was on track to have a great season last year. But Egbuka not only being able to be in that room, but also to learn from those caliber of wide receivers, just going to benefit him even more to be a threat for this team that's ready to win now, but also for Egbuka, who could potentially have the wide receiver 1 role after a Mike Evans slows down or retires, and could be the future wide receiver 1 for this Buccaneers franchise. Talking about a Chris Godwin, though, I think it was huge for the Buccaneers to retain him on this new 3-year, $66 million contract with $44 million guaranteed, where he could have went to elsewhere like the Patriots, who offered him more reportedly. He stayed with the Buccaneers, and he's been another player who embodies the consistency of this Buccaneers franchise. And like I said, that dislocated ankle was very unfortunate last season, but in his 8 seasons, 4 of those, he's had 1,000 receiving yards, and which included 3 consecutive seasons over 1,000 receiving yards. And I think he would have for sure passed that last season, because in 7 games last year, he had 50 receptions for 576 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns. Like I said, he was on track to have a huge year. And with him still being unlikely to play in week 1, I think for whenever Chris Godwin returns for the Buccaneers, that's going to be huge to even further unlock that offense. And like I stated a second ago, utilize those 3-by-1 sets with Mike Evans, Emeka Egbuka, Jalen McMillan, even putting Rashad White and Bucky Irving, both running backs, in those sets to be multiple marrying in the run and pass game. I know under Liam Cohen last season, they used a lot of 12 personnel, and I would certainly expect that in this upcoming season, because I think their tight end Cade Otton and Payne Durham, they were very crucial for the success not only in the run game but in the pass game. And Otton in his 3rd year last season was really great in the receiving game in 2024 in his 3rd season, having 59 receptions for 600 receiving yards and 4 touchdowns. So yeah, I think 12 personnel and really just making sure the 2 tight end sets are gonna open up the run game even more. But talking about the run and pass game, though, Rashad White, but specifically Bucky Irving, they were really integral for the success of the run game in 2024, and they look to build on that in 2025. Now, Rashad White, since being drafted in the 2022 draft in the 3rd round, has been very solid and consistent for the Buccaneers. His best season so far being in the 2023 season, when he had 272 carries for 990 rushing yards and 6 rushing touchdowns. And going into 2024, he looked to be running back 1. But in the 4th round of that draft, though, the Buccaneers drafted Bucky Irving out of Oregon, and really throughout the year he just took off and really took away that running back 1 position. And it's not to say that Rashad White isn't still going to have a lot of carries, because he still was integrated a lot in the offense even when Bucky Irving emerged last year. But I think it's likely to say that Bucky Irving is now the running back 1 of this team. At that 5'10", 195-pound frame, Irving is very elusive, and you saw that as he played all 17 games in the regular season and the playoff game too, where he had 207 carries for over 1,100 rushing yards and 8 rushing touchdowns. And even even from a receiving aspect, he nearly had 400 receiving yards on 47 receptions. No touchdowns though, but he averaged 8.3 yards per reception as well too. So that's why I mentioned that Irving and Rachaad White will both be integral in the pass game as well too. Even Rachaad White last season had 51 receptions for 393 receiving yards and 6 touchdowns. So when you're getting a total of 17 touchdowns, nearly 20 total touchdowns out of both of your young running backs in that nucleus in the backfield, that's important and paramount for the success of this team going forward, and to really, like I said, throw defenses off balance to respect the pass, but now they have to respect the run, and that'll keep them guessing on every single snap. I think the heartbeat of this team though in Tampa Bay, and it always has been, even when they won their first Super Bowl in Super Bowl 38 over the Raiders and Super Bowl 55 when they dominated the Chiefs 31-9, the Buccaneers have always been known to have dominant, relentless, and physical defenses, and Todd Bowles being now the head coach, previously the defensive coordinator, before being hired at the head coaching position, succeeding Bruce Arians in 2022, he's been able to really put that on steroids in terms of a scheme perspective. Bowles uses a lot of cover 3 zone with a 5-man pressure, and also he disguises a lot. Baker Mayfield has talked about it repeatedly this year in training camp and just in practices in general, how sometimes it's hard for him to really read the defense because Bowles continues to disguise his corners and safeties, and sometimes showing different blitz and zones, and having Baker to check constantly at the line of scrimmage to see what they're truly in, and still even after that being overwhelmed in practice. So that's a beautiful thing when you have your offense who has the potential to be one of the best in the league at a high level, and the Buccaneers who have one of the most cerebral head coaches having that defensive mindset, being able to sharpen each other's iron and build overall a formidable team to be one of the best teams not only in the NFC but potentially in the NFL. They ranked as a top 5 run defense in the 2024 season, but they were a little bit down on the defensive team statistics compared to 2023 because of a previous mentioned thing that I said, with the expectation that they would draft a corner or someone on the defense in the first round. With that, their cornerback, they got beat a lot last season, and I think the perfect remedy for the Buccaneers doing that, when a lot of people expected them to draft a cornerback in the first round, they went wide receiver in the first round. Drafting a Benjamin Morrison in the second round, I think that he's going to be a player out of Notre Dame who ended up getting injured last year, missing the rest of the season because of a torn labrum. But I think that the Benjamin Morrison can be one of these players to learn from corners like an Antoine Winfield Jr., be able to complement corners like a Jamel Dean, Bryce Hall, their safeties, Tyke Smith, Kevon Merriweather, Zion McCollum, Josh Hayes. I think a Benjamin Morrison is going to be able to really develop at a high level in this Todd Bowles defensive scheme. And the fortunate thing for him, since he suffered his injury mid-season at Notre Dame last year, that he's been able to be available at training camp, and he's shown a lot of great things, even impressing a quarterback like a Baker Mayfield at times. If you look at his stats too, throughout his 3 seasons at Notre Dame, he was the epitome of being consistent throughout it all. If you look at 2022 in particular, his first season, his freshman year, he had a total of 33 tackles, 1 TFL, but the one stat that pops out the most is 6 interceptions, 6 picks. That's huge to add to this defense, and in 2023 he had 3 interceptions to complement that. But last season he only played 6 games, as I mentioned, only having 20 tackles, no TFLs, and he had that hip injury. But I think that he's going to be able to learn and develop in this scheme and be a weapon that will certainly have some stumbling blocks, as young corners do. I mean, even the best corners in NFL get burnt at times because it's one of the hardest positions to play in sports, period. But I think that Morrison, he can be a key fixture in this secondary for the Buccaneers going forward and for the future. But I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about that dominant defensive line with a player like a Vita Vea, one of the best defensive tackles in the league. Levante David, still playing at the linebacker position, entering his 14th season, being one of the greatest, not only Tampa Bay Buccaneer players of all time, but being one of the best linebackers of all time, and just continuing to add that familiarity and that veteran presence for that team. He was a part of the Super Bowl team in 2020. He went through the ups and downs even before the Jameis Winston era, being a part of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers since the 2012 season when he was drafted. Him returning for another year I think is great, and he wants to potentially try to get the Buccaneers their 3rd Super Bowl in franchise history and his 2nd overall, and he's still very effective. Even last season he had 5.5 sacks and an interception with 122 total tackles. Him staying there is huge, and also them signing a Hassan Reddick on a 1-year $14 million contract with $12 million guaranteed. I think a lot of people forgot how effective he was for the Philadelphia Eagles because all of the whole contract debacle with the Jets not showing up, stuff like that, and then showing up and not really being effective, and the Jets being so putrid that he really just wasn't as effective. But if you look at 2023 and 2022, but if you really look at from the 2020 to 2023 season, some of his best seasons in his career, when he was on the Cardinals in 2020 2020, he had 12.5 sacks. In 2021, he had 11 sacks. 2022, he had 16 sacks with the Eagles, who made the Super Bowl that year, but lost to the Chiefs that season. And then in 2023, his final year with the Philadelphia Eagles, he had 11 sacks. And he is 30 years old, yes, but he's still very effective as an edge rusher, and is another piece to add to that defense with veteran experience alongside of Levante David, adding to that defensive line that can be very disruptive, not only in their division in NFC South, be very disruptive against offensive lines to create havoc and be utilized perfectly in this Todd Bowles system. I'm really intrigued to see Hassan Reddick in a defensive scheme that Todd Bowles has the helm of. With all that being said though, guys, before I get further into this NFL season preview of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe and turn on post notifications. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter /X at SwaggyRuss and TikTok at SwaggyRuss02 for shorts, reels, all content stuff like that. This is preview number 17 and a lot more still to go, but this has been an amazing series and I'm looking forward to talking about every single team. If I haven't talked about yours already, we will. But with all that being said though, let's go on further to talk about why the Tampa Bay Buccaneers will be dangerous in 2025. I think it's key and a great thing that all 11 offensive starters are returning for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the 2025 season. And yes, they have a new offensive coordinator in Josh Grizzard after Liam Cohen left in a very passive aggressive way, but really that was just a crazy way in how he left to become the head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Duval.
But them hiring within and really not changing too much of the terminology in their offensive system, continuing to build on the past couple of years and seasons that they've had, it's a perfect thing. But they are starting off with some adversity, as Tristan Wirfs, their all-pro left tackle, won't be starting the season because of a procedure that he had on his knee in early July. That's okay though, because they're just gonna have just more offensive linemen step up, maybe potentially a Charlie Heck at the backup left tackle position, showing that he can be serviceable until Wirfs returns. But also Wirfs and then Chris Godwin being out, that's gonna show the Buccaneers where they're at in terms of a depth standpoint. But I think that they'll be solid in the area because they had one of the more dominant offensives last season. From a total offensive perspective, they ranked 3rd overall. They were also 3rd in passing offense, 4th in rushing offense, 4th scoring, and also 4th in the red zone, and they ranked 1st and 3rd down offense. This team was already dangerous last year in terms of an offensive perspective, and continuing to build on that, adding in the Bucky Irving in year 2, Emeka Ibuka being slotted into this offense. I think it just complements the offense even more to be at the top of the league statistically, but also in the eye test overall, watching the game, watching the tape, watching the film. You see that this team can at times be unguardable, and that'll be further the case in this 2025 season and be a key element of why they're going to be a scary and dangerous squad in the NFC. Yes, their division is not great. We already know that. Not gonna lie. The Saints, just look at the quarterback perspective in the division. And no disrespect to Bryce Young, because he actually played solid once he ended up getting the starting job back from Andy Dalton. I'm still not crazy about that team. They drafted T-Mac. I do like him being their 1st round draft pick at wide receiver because I wanted him for my Dallas Cowboys, but we got George Pickens, so I'm not tripping. But anyways, I also like the Panthers having an Xavier Legette in his 2nd year. They have Chuba Hubbard, who was solid. They signed Rico Dowdle from the Cowboys. But I'm still not looking at the Panthers as a team that's going to be super improved, and we'll talk about them even more on their preview, but they will be a competitive team. I will say that for sure. The Saints, we're not even really gonna spend too much time on them right now because I'm gonna not all the way but kind of roast them when I preview their video. They had Tyler Shuck at quarterback, Kellen Moore head coach. Yeah, we'll see what they do. But really for me, the Buccaneers and the Falcons, that's where this division comes down to, and we saw that last year. I talked about it a little bit earlier. The Falcons won both games in the season series last year, but still ended up losing the division. There's a lot of factors for that. Like I said, I'll analyze that further in their video, but that's a great thing for the Buccaneers in terms of an adversity standpoint. I mentioned going into this year having a couple of injuries offensively, but even when you dug yourself in a hole in terms of winning the division, you still were able to win games throughout the season to help you end up winning when the Atlanta Falcons team was in disarray after Kirk Cousins started off hot, him really playing like shite, and then Michael Penix Jr. starting, and still he was solid but not enough for them to make the playoffs. And that's just even greater for the Bucs to try to get a 5th consecutive NFC South title, to try to get the greatest playoff positioning possible. And for the past couple of years in 2023, yes, they won the division, and same with 2024. They were 9-8 in 2023 and 10-7 in 2024. But I think in 2025 they can have the potential to be a 11-6, 12-5 team. Seriously, because if you look at their schedule, it's very favorable, ranking at 19th overall, and they get to start off, speaking of, against the Atlanta Falcons in Atlanta, and they can try to get some get back from that game that they lost in overtime against the Falcons, where they were leading at halftime too. That was a high scoring game where they lost 36-30. They can try to win that game and set the tone in terms of an NFC South perspective, continuing to stand on them owning the division. And then in week 2 they play against the Texans, and that's probably going to be a game that I end up going to. Shout out to my dad. He's a huge Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan, so I know that he's enjoying this video. But that'll be a great test of a team. I remember we went to the 2023 game. It looked like the Bucs were going to win, and then CJ Stroud had that great final possession. But I think the Buccaneers, they'll have that clearly in their mind that in terms of the players who were on that roster to try to get a great win in that game. That's going to be a great watch as well in terms of two teams with some top defenses, and also offensively both teams having great offenses, and also both of those teams have both won their divisions the past 2 years, both being in the South. So that's very ironic of a matchup, but I think that'll be really good in week 2 against the Texans. Play against the Jets in week 3, and then play against the Eagles in week 4, a team that they beat in the 2023-24 playoffs, and also they played against them last year. And a lot of people don't remember because the Eagles, they went 13-4 and won the Super Bowl, but the Buccaneers dominated the Eagles in week 4 of last season, winning 33-16. I wouldn't be surprised similar like that happened, but only time will tell. Then they played the Seahawks. They play against the 49ers again. They played the 49ers last year. That was an amazing game, even though they lost. They play against the Lions, and they beat the Lions last year. The Lions, they were 15-2. Everyone looked at them as a Goliath type of team last year. And I know the Lions beat the Buccaneers in the 2023 playoffs, but in 2024, in the regular season, the Buccaneers won that game 20-16. So like I'm saying, the Buccaneers, they're a really sneaky threat in terms of actually contending to make a deep playoff run. And I wouldn't be surprised if they're a team that could potentially make the NFC Championship game. But furthering along with that, I'll talk about that a little bit more after talking about the schedule. They'll play against the Saints in their division. They play against the Patriots as well too, who will be improved, but I think the Buccaneers are still better than. They'll play against the Buffalo Bills. That'll be a really good game, a good watch, and a good test in terms of playing against one of the best AFC teams. That'll be a measuring stick type of game for the Buccaneers. And they play against the Rams the week after. Same thing on Sunday Night Football. That'll be a measuring stick game as well. They play against the Cardinals too. The Cardinals, I think they have a shot to make the playoffs. Their defense is going to be really good next year. It's really about their offense and rapport with Marvin Harrison Jr. and Kyler Murray getting things together. But that'll be a great game. Play against the Saints again. The Falcons in their division. The Falcons for a second time. Then the Panthers in their division. The Dolphins. And then finishing off with the Panthers again. It's always like either the Buccaneers play the Saints or the Panthers in week 18 all the time in the last game of the season. But with that being said, though, I think that's a solid schedule for them, and that's also 5 opponents that they'll be playing against that made the playoffs in 2024. But even a Seattle Seahawks team, they won 10 games last year and missed the playoffs, but that's a really good opponent there. So they have a favorable schedule, but still they have a good amount of tests in that schedule to really show that they're a legit contender, and I think that they'll do that and show why they are truly a dangerous team. So yes, I certainly think that this team can be 12-5 or 11-6. And last year, yes, they lost both of those games to the Falcons in their division, but besides that, those were the only games that they lost in the division because they were 4-2 overall against the NFC South. And I can see them this year winning a game or even both games against the Falcons. I know the Falcons are a really good team, have a lot of talent offensively, and they're improving their defense, but still, I still would predict and favor the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to win a 5th consecutive NFC South title and have a home playoff game at least going into the 2025 playoffs. And who knows, they can potentially be a top 3 seed depending on how things go. I think they're going to be a really formidable team that has NFC Championship game potential. It just really comes down to their opponents in the NFC and how consistent they are overall, and the war of attrition, because if you're not healthy in the NFL, we know that you'll end up collapsing. We saw that with the Detroit Lions on their defense last year, as they had 20 different starters start for them defensively. You don't want anything like that. If you can have 80 to 95% of your roster being intact, that's a favorable thing for realistic contenders in the NFL to try to go on a Super Bowl run. And I certainly think that the Buccaneers, they have the potential to win a couple of playoff games and make an NFC Championship game. And I wouldn't be shocked at all if they're one of the potential teams to represent the NFC in Super Bowl 60 at Santa Clara, because this team has a lot of talent and consistency overall, offensively and defensively, being one of the most consistent organizations in the NFL. But y'all guys, for sure, let me know in the comments down below, what do you think about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers' chances overall this season? Do you think that they're going to win a 5th consecutive NFC South title? Do you think that they're going to win a playoff game in the wild card round, make it to the divisional round? Do you think that's the max for them? Or do you kind of think like me that you wouldn't be surprised at all if they're a team that could end up being in the NFC Championship game potentially if all things go right, depending on how they get things together offensively and defensively, being complementary in the 2025 season? Let me know what y'all think in the comments down below. That's the first video for this NFC South division. Stay tuned here soon for the Atlanta Falcons. We'll be talking about them, and then of course talking about the Saints and the Panthers. Then after this division, transitioning to the AFC South. A lot more content on the way, guys. At the recording of this video, we're a couple of weeks and change away from the Dallas Cowboys playing against the Philadelphia Eagles on the road for the 2025 season opener. Going to be an amazing season. I'm really looking forward to it, guys. So y'all let me know your thoughts on the Buccaneers for this video, but overall your expectations and your overall excitement for this 2025 NFL season. Y'all keep being blessed, guys. Make sure you hit the like button and subscribe and turn on post notifications. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter /X at Swaggy Russ. TikTok at Swaggy Russ too for shorts, reels, content, all things of that nature. Like I said, stay tuned for a lot more NFL videos, but also NBA videos, shorts, reels, a lot of different content as well, guys. Y'all keep being legendary. Keep Jesus Christ at the center of your lives. Always know that you are here for a reason and have purpose. Let your light shine, guys, always. Y'all have a good one. I love y'all. Y'all keep being blessed. Peace.